1,000 digital coins could ease your alarm clock forever, unless we just stumbled upon the biggest crypto daydream of the decade. So let's think about it. Your entire path to early retirement condensed into the cost of a mid-range smartphone. Well, that's the promise here splashed all over X last night, and it hijacked my brain so hard that I forgot to finish my dinner. Now, a guy named 𝗕𝗘𝗪𝗠, he's kind of the neighborhood kind of hype man for XRP, right? Now, his tweet yelled that scooping up just 1,000 tokens right now could buy us what he calls a joyful and free life by 2029. So we're just 4 years away from swapping commutes for hammocks then, right? Courtesy of a $2,000 bet. Now, on paper, it sounds like the kind of financial equivalent of a carb-free pizza, too good to be true, but you're still desperate to try a bite. So I filled a mug with midnight coffee and fell down the rabbit hole to see whether that dream is made of rocket fuel or fairy dust. First, a quick scene setting. Like XRP, stickier price today, is kind of about $2.17, right? Multiply that by 1,000 and you're looking at roughly around $2,170. Basically, what I paid for my last laptop, after kind of sales and tax and, why not RAM upgrade, right? Now, nothing kind of life-changing, but if that kind of stack of tokens kind of morphs into a cool $1 million by 2029, well, each coin must skyleap to an even kind of $1,000. Now that's a, 45,900% return. Now for context, Bitcoin's whole legendary run from 0 to 60 plus grand, was roughly a 12 million% sprint over 14 years. But that included growing pains, legal kind of fistfights, and enough heart attack price swings to keep, cardiologists busy. Now, a kind of 46,000% run in 4 years, ambitious, doesn't kind of scratch the surface here, right? We're talking about roller skates on a rocket ship. Now, before you kind of toss confetti or drag out the kind of scam stamp, I want to know how many people are actually holding this magic number. So I dig into the XRP rich list. Yes, that's the official name, as kind of if Scrooge McDuck kind of coded the database, if you will. Now it says that there's 6.38 million wallets that exist, and out of those, 230,504 hold between 500 and 1,000 tokens. And just 10% crank that up past 2,500. So owning a kind of fat stack of XRP is actually rarer than I thought. Suddenly, those 1,000 coin believers, start looking like early members of some kind of secret club. Now, if you've ever kind of, envisioned this kind of, people who bought Apple stock in the 90s or Dogecoin before TikTok kind of got a hold of it, well, this stack kind of plants a kind of sneaky seed for FOMO. But dreams aren't cheap, right? So let's check the kind of skeptic aisle then, right? 𝗕𝗘𝗪𝗠, one of those kind of prediction websites, people kind of quote when they kind of want optimistic numbers with a kind of side of kind of fancy kind of charts, well, pegs XRP's 2029 minimum price at $25. Even that is a monstrous 1,052% jump. So let's think about multiplying your money 11 times while doing nothing more than kind of, kind of remembering kind of your wallet password. Still, $25 is not 1,000. Now, 𝗕𝗘𝗪𝗠 doesn't see a $1,000, price tag happening by even by 2020 or 2050, I should say, which turns the 4-year kind of escape narrative into a, well, you might retire when your grandkids retire scenario. Enter 𝗕𝗓𝗪𝗀 from Crypto-Charged. Picture a stage, fog machines, laser lights. He kind of strides out, waving kind of slides that scream XRP to $1,000 in 10 years. Now, his kind of bullet points have energy, right? Growing on-demand liquidity, bank integrations, mountains of cross-border payments ripe for disruption. Regulatory kind of clarity on the horizon, right? The logic is pretty solid on paper. If the global payments market is a kind of $5 trillion pie and Ripple kind of nabs even a kind of forkful, well, XRP becomes very precious. But the timeline sounds like he kind of sprinkled optimism dust, over every potential obstacle. And meanwhile, veteran crypto YouTuber 𝗕𝗕𝗪𝗔𝗠𝗪, right, pops in like the practical uncle at a kind of barbecue. This is the same guy who, told the internet to buy Bitcoin back when it cost, a little like a latte, as much as a latte, or a cappuccino, if you will. Now, he's not kind of dunking on XRP, but he does throw ice water on the kind of get rich quick angle here, right? And his thesis, don't tie your retirement yacht with one anchor, especially, an anchor still kind of, tangling with kind of regulators. Now, diversify, stay humble, and remember the .com crash if your memory needs to be kind of a cautionary reboot maybe. And then that brings us to the elephant in the room, right? Or the elephant breakdancing of the room, if you will, right? And that's the SEC lawsuit, right? Ripple's courtroom tango with the US regulators has kept XRP in limbo longer than my kind of half-painted guest room, right? Now, a kind of practical or partial victory here, recently kind of pumped morale. Judges kind of hinted that XRP isn't a security in all situations, but appeals and legal kind of fine print still kind of hang over like a storm cloud at a picnic. Now, banking giants won't cannonball into a pool unless, they're sure that there's actually water, and regulatory clarity is the water. Now, irony alert here, right? The rocket fuel for XRP to hit triple digits might be the very kind of bureaucracy crypto was actually invented to dodge. So let's zoom out to the real world stakes. Suppose you're Jess living in suburban Ohio, mortgage manageable, 2 kids, golden retriever, picket fence. Now, $1 million nest egg could plausibly cover the rest of your life. College funds, a fishing boat, weekly tacos. But, Marco in downtown Dubai, well, he's shelling out rents that, would make Jess faint, right? The retirement bliss probably needs closer to 3 mil. So, the promise here of a kind of free life is, well, slippery, right? Freedom is relative. One person's kind of victory lap is another's kind of bus fare. And so it's time to talk psychology then. There's a reason that not holding 1,000 XRP is insanity, right? And these kind of tweets, they rack up, and the retweets, happen more than maybe cat videos. Now, scarcity kind of triggers tribal vibes. So if we kind of believe a limited edition sneaker drop, could triple in price, well, we kind of camp outside the store at 3 a.m., right? Now, crypto plays that kind of mental string on steroids because the supply cap is coded, right? Visible and global. So when kind of Farina calls you insane for not buying, well, he's basically saying that the VIP door is open and you're choosing to kind of stay on the sidewalk. And nobody wants to stay on the sidewalk when these kind of situations crop up. Now, that doesn't make it the safe bet though, right? Just imagine 2 possible futures here, right? There's a timeline, A, right? SEC resolution in 2025. RippleNet inks major deals with Asian and Middle Eastern banks. CBDCs use XRP as a bridge for cross-border, payments and transfers and things like that, as maybe bridge rails even, right? Price rockets from where it is to $120, then $240. Then people stop laughing at $1,000 forecasts, right? Your $2,170 transforms into a kind of down payment on a kind of beachfront property. Then there's timeline B. Regulations remain murky. Banks roll their own blockchains, right? Hype kind of drains and price crawls to, well, $5 while you're still kind of paying subscription fees that you forgot you signed up for. So the same initial bet, wildly different endings, right? Risk isn't just a kind of finance word essentially, right? It's actually the air that we breathe in crypto. And still, I couldn't resist a little kind of field experiment. I scrolled my bank statement looking for kind of, fictitious kind of money drains, and hello, monthly green juice delivery I barely drink, right? Cancel that, redirect the kind of savings to XRP, see how fast I can hit 1,000 coins, right? It took 3 clicks and one kind of mild pang of regret, kind of about kale. The next morning it kind of hit me. I exchanged an overpriced beverage trend for a lottery ticket that might explode or expire worthlessly, right? Either way, I've got a story to tell. And stories, well, they matter more than spreadsheets here. Because remember, the Bitcoin pizza guy, right? He didn't just overpay for pizza. He minted, folklore essentially, right? Now, if XRP actually climbs to $1,000, the very early kind of 1,000 coin holders become legends in themselves, and they'll be known at every single cocktail party around the world. If it fizzles, well, there's a cautionary tale here, right? Both outcomes guarantee a cameo in someone's Netflix doc, that kind of decades from now. So let's go ahead and geek check the supply numbers then, right? XRP's supply cap sits at 100 billion, far higher than Bitcoin's 21 million. Now, critics argue that heavy supply dilutes moonshot potential. Pro-XRP folk, though, counter this, that kind of the cap matters less than demand velocity. Now, if trillions in global settlements blast through Ripple's pipes daily, well, even a cheaper token can soak up value by sheer volume. Now, think cafeteria kind of trays at lunchtime, right? 1 big tray or 10 small ones, right? The same amount of food moves, right? Price per token reflects demand relative to the float. But for $1,000 per token or per coin, we're talking about a market cap north of $100 trillion, more than the current GDP of planet Earth. Could XRP do, fractional splits here? Sure, but the headline number is still quite boggling. And it's at this point I'm going to remind you all that market cap actually isn't all that important. It is just a calculation. It doesn't represent, liquidity, doesn't represent the amount of money flowing in. It just represents the current kind of price multiplied by the circulating supply. Okay, so if we have these two things that we know that moves market cap, well, we automatically know that we really need to focus on what's moving the price rather than thinking about a $100 trillion market cap. So what moves price? Well, that's supply and demand, and absolutely nothing to do with $100 trillion market cap, which is theoretical. I mean, just take a look at some of the most recent events where you have $6 billion cryptocurrencies dropping down to $500 million cryptocurrencies in a blink of an eye, and no one got paid out $5.5 billion. It's all theoretical, make-believe digital numbers essentially. So don't get tripped up by market cap. But now comes the point where my brain hits the climax kind of crescendo, if you will. What if the kind of philosophy only kind of halfway comes true? Say XRP just hits $100 by 2029. Well, you drop $2,000 today, and 4 years later, you're sitting on $100,000. Now that kind of pays off a chunk of your mortgage, or bankrolls kind of backpacking around maybe Southeast Asia, right? That's kind of not freedom necessarily for everyone, but it's a door kicked wider open that most people don't get that opportunity for. Maybe the most kind of investments that promise kind of such a tiny window, whereas this is a huge window. The flip side, of course, is if it collapses to pennies. Well, you're out a kind of vacation's worth of cash, which stings, but it's not like a nuke at Christmas, for example, right? I've kind of burned more than that on kind of fad gadgets. I mean, this laptop over here was double that, and I don't use it, right? So you kind of get the idea here, right? And they just kind of gather dust in the closet. So after kind of sprinting through calculations, hype statements, and doom post threads, my conclusion is basically, a kind of Venn diagram, right? Rational caution intersects speculative thrill. Allocate what you're okay kind of forgetting about, like the cash that you might blow on premium coffee pods this year, then kind of mentally write it off. That way, if XRP does in fact moon, you're dancing. If it tanks, you shrug, right? Crypto markets reward kind of stargazers, but punish rent money gamblers swift and hard. So let me snapshot the takeaways so that you can screenshot them mentally, right? Right now, 1,000 XRP costs around $2,170. For that stash to morph into $1 million by 2029, the price per coin needs to kind of leap towards $1,000. That's a 45,900% climb. Now, community kind of champions, like 𝗕𝗘𝗪𝗠𝗠𝗘𝗥𝗦 and 𝗕𝗙𝗪𝗏, they kind of call 1,000 tokens as the ticket to paradise, right? With 𝗕𝗙𝗪𝗏 labeling any kind of smaller bag in insanity, right? Now, only about 230,000 wallets even hold that range, making the club smaller than some NFL stadium crowds. Now, forecast diverge, right? They do diverge, right? You've got Telegon, who sees $25 within 4 years. Great gains, but not yacht money, right? While Crypto Charged gambles on $1,000 within a decade. 𝗕𝗘𝗪𝗔𝗡𝗪, basically keeps your head on straight. Regulatory clarity, bank adoption, and payment network effects are the real fuel, or handbrake, on this price rocket. Risk is losing $2,000. Rewards kind of span from 6 figures to cosmic numbers that may bend math as we know it. So where do I land personally? Well, I'm nibbling, not gobbling, right? I kind of treat XRP like one glossy ticket in my diversified carnival of assets, equal parts hedge, hope, and why not story fodder. So all right, that's kind of my brain dump on 1,000, XRP challenge, if you will. If you're kind of still here and you're officially a part of the kind of curious crew, hit that subscribe button and slide into the next video where we tackle another crypto myth that kind of refuses to die.